Hey there, it's Margie Bryce, your host of the Crabby Pastor podcast, where we talk about all things sustainability, whether it's sustainability in ministry, in your personal life, and we acknowledge that the church is in a transitional time, so we hit topics there too that are going to stretch your mind and the way you lead, especially how you lead yourself so that you don't become the Crabby Pastor. Hey there, this is Margie Bryce with the Crabby Pastor podcast. I'm hosting a Back from Burnout episode. I know these are quite popular. Number one, so we can see that it is possible to come back, and we want you to come back because we don't really want to see anybody having to depart ministry early and depart their call early or earlier maybe than was intended. In some cases, people take a different tack with their ministry, goes in a different direction. Sometimes they come back to pastoral work. It just depends. And I do see God working in all of that, but burnout is, I don't think that's a path that anybody would necessarily select. Now I think I'll do burnout. No. So I am here today with Rob Gashler, and I met Rob at a meeting of the, let me see if I can get this right, Society of Professors in Christian Ministry. We had a conference not that long ago, and I met him there, and he volunteered. I'm always excited when people will volunteer to do these back from burnouts. And so far it's been all male. So ladies, just saying, that have been willing to come and share in the hopes of either encouraging or instructing us and helping us navigate ministry well. So, Rob, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thank you for having me on. I
Sure.
appreciate the opportunity to tell my story. And my name's Rob, and I am the discipleship pastor at Second Baptist Church in Baytown, Texas. And I've only been here for 6 months and moved here after living most of my life in Arizona.
Okay. Arizona. And
Yeah.
then you moved to where again?
Baytown, Texas. It's east of Houston. It's a
Oh,
refinery community.
oh, okay. All right. That it's still hot climate.
Yes.
Hot. You went from one hot climate. So tell us, is it better if it's not a dry heat?
Oh boy. The humidity is everything they say. So I grew up in the dry heat. I would take the dry heat over this humidity any day.
Yeah, yes. And I've always lived in the humid climates. So tell me then what kind of ministry role you were serving in when you started to meander towards burnout.
hmm I think it may have really started. I started doing college ministry. I did college ministry for almost a decade, and I was in a church setting that had a lot of programming, a lot of schedule, multiple services on the weekend. And I began to feel it there a little bit, but I had not yet learned how to protect myself or really be disciplined in my spiritual habits to practice Sabbath rest or spend real quality time with God. And I went from that into church planting. And
Mm.
so that's a whole nother animal of a one-man show, building a vision, recruiting a team, raising financial support, and trying to make a church go and developing the vision and strategy, all the systems, plus preach every Sunday and always trying to engage the community. And I'm just the type of person, I'm certainly an anxious Christian and I deal with anxiety. And there's always that pressure of, man, have I done enough today? Have I engaged enough people? Have I met enough new contacts? Are we doing the right things? Are we going the right direction? So my brain would never turn off as a church planter. And so it was just one thing after another, trying to drive this thing along. And so that's really where I ended up clearly realizing I was burned out. But I also didn't realize to what extent burnout runs or to what extent we have to take measures to recover from it until
Mm.
I began to research it.
Yeah. And you said something that kind of caught my attention that you were an anxious Christian. I mean, is there such a thing?
Yeah, well, there's a book called The Anxious Christian
Oh.
by a marriage and family therapist, Rhett Smith, and I went to college with him, and
Oh.
it's a good book. He recounts his own personal story throughout the book, and I realized, man, that's what I deal with, and just I I'm a shepherd, and then I when I shepherd people, I worry about their well-being, and I worry about how we're doing things, and in college ministry too, well, and church planting, I always say, I don't care how pious we pretend to be, you cannot escape the comparison trap in ministry as a church
Mhm.
planter, or a college minister, because there's always, someone doing it better, and that's just hard.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'm glad you identified some of the complexities of church planting. I mean, you do have a team, you usually have some kind of a launch team, but at the same time, there are such a myriad of tasks that are required of you. And all the while, you are also shepherding and doing the regular Sunday worship work as well. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, when did you start thinking that there might be a problem?
I began to be increasingly concerned, I would say early in 2019, and
Mhm.
I began to search for some other ministry opportunities. You
The
know,
exit ramp.
yes, the exit ramp
Yeah.
out of church planting. But I also had this strong, I'm a high level of responsibility kind of person. If I commit to do something, I'm going to see it through. If I commit to a group of people, I'm going to be committed to them. And my church plant had a dynamic little church family. And so I couldn't on one side I couldn't imagine leaving them, but on the other side I felt like I needed to get out. So I began exploring other opportunities, but kept pressing on. In 2019, in the summer, we went to the Purpose Driven Church Conference. I took three of my leaders. They got very excited for the future of what we could do. I got excited that I had some other people excited. But then we moved into 2020, and of course, then COVID hit. We were in the middle of a campaign as a church to engage our community, and then that all got shut down. And so I just remember when we went home and we were forced to stay home for 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
then turned into, yeah, two
Yeah.
more weeks. So we in Arizona, we were shut down for a month, but after that, we were given some liberty to open back up.
Hmm.
But I remember watching my other pastor friends scramble to get online and, do things online and move digitally. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I didn't care so much to do that, didn't have the energy to do that, and had some good downtime to rest, to reflect, to spend time with God. And our community was so small, we still were connecting at each other's home a little bit. For those first 2 weeks, we were just on Zoom, but then I started to do not a service, but just a video, a live feed, just a sermon for 4 weeks. And so I just knew then for sure that there was a burnout issue. So I actually invited our small congregation into the conversation about the possibility that I needed to move on, and they wanted to support me in that. And so that's where that began.
Hmm. So then what were the indicators that you, besides looking for the exit ramp? I've heard of pastors Googling, what else can I do with an MDiv? you know,
All right.
and so that's when you're kind of, and that is an indicator when you start thinking a lot, and
Yeah.
it starts to grow about what else could I be doing here? Maybe I'd rather go work in the cafeteria in the high school
Yeah.
or
And
be a
that,
greeter at
right,
Walmart or something.
right. That's the thing. When I realized I wasn't concerned about scrambling to get online or check
Hmm.
on our people. I just felt like I was drained. I didn't have anything left to give. There was definitely in the Maslach burnout inventory,
Hmm.
now that I know what it is,
Right,
understanding
right.
the depersonalization concept of how I just detached I was emotionally exhausted. I detached from the work. And so I did begin to think, what else could I do out there? Um, but I didn't jump out of ministry altogether at that point. I moved back into college ministry. It allowed me to focus again in a very specific area of ministry on a university campus and back at the University of Arizona. So I was there for the COVID year that they weren't meeting on campus, and then the year they opened back up on campus. But even still, I just didn't have the drive that I used to have for ministry. And so from there, I began to really explore exiting the ministry, and I actually did for 2 years as far as paid ministry, and started to go into parks and recreation staff. And I had been a realtor all my adult life, so I was doing that on the side as well.
Okay, so you had a semi exit ramp kind of experience. So what did then you started to troll and learn more about burnout? What kind of help and remedy did you seek out?
Yeah, I ended up writing a research paper for a PhD seminar on
Mhm.
ministry burnout, and at that point, I realized, for one, there had been plenty of research already on pastors and ministry burnout, and then discover
Mhm.
some quality resources
Mm.
to learn how to cultivate. The common theme of the research that's out there has been that the spiritual health and spiritual vitality of the minister is key to preventing ministry burnout. And so discovering some tools and resources to guard and cultivate Sabbath rest, and then also to cultivate your own spiritual walk with time in the Word, time in prayer, and then a balanced schedule. And then from there, as I began to actually jump into my actual dissertation research, which ended up being on the same topic, a newer book came out called The Burnout Challenge,
Mm.
and looking at the relationship of people with their work and identifying that the workplace and the organization structure is at play also and as much at fault. It's not just the individual. So, just the individual, we've often treated them as the dysfunctional person who needs to get it
Mm.
back together and get back in the workforce, whereas the organization itself can play a lot into someone. It could be what Christine Maslach calls a burnout factory. So it just produces burned out workers.
Mhm. Yeah,
The reality is a
unhealthy
lot of our
environments.
ministries do that.
Sure, sure. And certainly we expect that our ministry leaders are connected to Christ spiritually. We expect that piece. And then you mentioned the balanced work life. I mean, I think some of that also dovetails in with the piece that I like to attend to, and that is that just because you're spiritual doesn't mean that you don't need to attend to the physical and the mental and the emotional. What kind of help did you find on those topics?
I think one key one that stands out to me was, as I began to research, one of my colleagues in the PhD program I was in highly recommended Pastor Wayne Cordero's book,
Mm.
Leading on Empty. And when I read that, it was so helpful to understand the depth of burnout and the time that it takes to heal. And I just felt like as I read it, it gave me a roadmap to rediscover my more intimate walk with Christ, but also to allow me to be patient, to take the time to recover as well.
Mm, yes, because I like to use, do a hat tip to the area where I'm from is which is Detroit and say, you wouldn't treat your car the way that you treat yourself, your body. This is the vehicle God has given to you to function on the planet. And a piece of that is living into your call. But if you had a car and you never ever changed the oil, you never ever washed it, you never ever did any kind of maintenance. And then, especially, my personal favorite is when the car starts making really bad noises, you turn the radio up. And
Sure.
I think that's some of what ministry leaders sort of do is don't attend to some issues as they arise. Is that fair?
Yeah, certainly. And I think we just keep pressing on and we think, well, I just need a day off. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is, well, if I just take some time off, if I just take a few days off, but
Mhm.
then to realize even to look at the concept of sabbatical, to take time off after experiencing burnout, you've got to have several days just to unwind and disconnect from the workload and all the concerns and anxiety of the ministry before you can start to feel like you can rest. And so I even question the setting I'm in now has a very good balance, work-life balance. They really promote it, but the Sabbath or sabbatical they'll offer is a 1 month sabbatical, and I had questioned that because again, you need a week just to get disconnected from the work before you can learn to actually rest, and so that needs to be a longer process.
Hmm. So, what were some of the steps that you took to not mitigate, that's not even the right, but just to work yourself out of burnout?
Through it, I would say I was doing Bible reading and prayer, but it wasn't focused or wasn't quality. I hadn't learned to quiet my mind to just sit in the presence of God. So
Mhm.
while I was back in Tucson doing college ministry, I began to put some of that back in place, just some good quality quiet time, basically. And then moving on from there. Then when I moved into working in the secular world, so to speak, with Parks and Rec, I had to learn how to do that now, not as a pastor who could do it as part of my daily work, but to actually spend time with God as a layperson, so to speak, for a couple years. And so just redevelop the quality to my quiet time of being able to just sit in his presence, read the word, pray, and then even in there's an element in ministry of I'd say just telling yourself the truth. So telling yourself, okay, I'm off today. I do not need to worry about the ministry obligations. I don't need to check my email. And again, in the setting I'm in now, there's no expectation to check anything work related on a day off. And they're very good about staff guarding other staffs if they take a personal day or vacation day that they don't try to contact the person who's off. We try to resolve it without them. So I think that's really helpful on the organization side. But for me personally, it was the learning to cultivate a better time with God and telling myself when it was okay to not worry about work, disconnect, take the day off, and actually rest.
Yeah, because I think scripture's pretty clear about do not worry,
Hmm.
especially for tomorrow. Today has its own troubles,
Right.
and don't be anxious for anything. And I think that there's a lot of North American productivity mindset that kind of filters in on, especially like church planting, something like that, where it's, you got to make it happen instead of following God and allow God to let it happen. And I think that's a different mindset. And one of the ways, anyway, that ministry leaders can get trapped.
Yeah. And I think too, we have to be honest with ourselves. My ego could have said, well, I'm now that I've been the senior pastor of a church plant, I must seek out a senior pastorship. But I knew from my experience and knowing who I am, I thrived in support roles. And
Mm,
so I made a commitment to move back to a support role. And that's why at first I went back into college ministry as an associate pastor and campus minister. And then even now to come here and be the discipleship pastor, I have no interest in climbing the ladder or becoming the senior pastor. My desire is to serve in a support role and be a great support role for the rest of my career.
mm. And there's something to be said about, number one, the self-awareness that
Mhm.
that you have raised here, but also when you said I'm not climbing the ladder, and frequently that's climbing the ladder over other people to get there, which
Right,
is what Paul in Philippians 2 says, I don't want you climbing over other people to get where you need to go. That kind of competition is actually the polar opposite of humility,
right,
which is,
right,
that's a whole nother, like I think you raised earlier, the issue of competition among ministry leaders, even though
right.
that's not something we talk about
Yeah.
a lot. All
Right.
right, not at all. But
Yeah.
anyway, I remember sitting in a group of pastors and they said, this is probably a well-known fact among ministry colleagues, that we get together and kind of crank about things. Has
Hmm. Yeah.
that been your experience?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Yeah, we don't like to admit that. I was second career to ministry, so this was a real eye opener for me. But I'll
Mm.
never forget the one time they said, "Let's go around the room and everybody say something positive so we're not just sitting here complaining."
Yeah.
Okay. So we got halfway around the room, and this one ministry colleague says, "Well, we just completed our $1 million addition." And I was thinking, dude, you didn't
Yeah.
have to say the number.
Yeah.
Most of the pastors sitting here don't even have facilities
Right.
that had that kind of price tag on it. So, it's there. Sometimes it's unintentional, or the person isn't tapped into, maybe I ought not to say that number. And the competition's there.
Right. It's almost like it gets ingrained in us over time because those pastor fellowships conversations go that direction all the time.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an unknown fact for our listeners or not, but anyway, moving on here. So you found at some point then a better environment in
Right.
which to work, an environment that valued. And this is what I so appreciate from the millennials and youngers. They seem to have a better concept or desire toward the work life balance. Maybe they watched their parents go great guns and said, well, I'm not doing that. But you found an environment that is very supportive of that. What else? How does your life and your pace in ministry look different now compared to earlier years when you were headed on the burnout path?
I know I used to feel guilty if I wasn't, I always felt like, am I doing enough? Did I get enough done? And would never turn off the work mindset on my day off. Whereas now I certainly feel totally comfortable. I have a clear conscience to take my day off or days off and not be troubled by the work obligations of ministry. So that's a big part of it. Yesterday I took a day off and my supervisor had to contact me with a question, and he was very apologetic for even contacting me, but we had to answer the question. It was important. So, but that's the key thing is being having a clear conscience to turn off the work mindset on days off to rest and just enjoy being me. And there were years too in ministry, and I know many struggle with this, where your identity gets so wrapped up in who you are in ministry that you lose sight of being you. And I remember one time friends had said, you kind of got lost in being Rob, the student minister. We're glad to have just Rob back. And
Hmm.
so getting in touch with yourself to be or just feel enjoy being you, the person that God made you and called you to be, and enjoying his presence.
Why do you think ministry leaders do that? Sacrifice themselves in that way?
Yeah. That's a good question. And not sure I'm to the heart of the issue. I do think, I don't know. I mean, we're all fallen human beings, so we all have insecurities to some degree, but I wonder if it's the kind of people that are called to ministry are also wired a certain way
Hmm.
that we give our all to our work and then we get enmeshed emotionally in it and can't detach from it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And then, going along with that then is the feeling guilty. And I remember feeling that way when I would go to the gym. I felt like, oh no, I should be attending to my massive to-do list. I'm
Yeah,
slacking here. When in reality, what I was doing was a good thing for me and for my health so that I could keep going.
yeah, that's true. And you mentioned going to the gym. That I used to try to run, but then when I did join a gym, that was totally new to me. But now that's a key part of my personal well-being is I really guard my workout time and I don't try to take calls or texts at the time that I'm working out. And because that's just truly my time to take care of myself, decompress. And so that's an important element as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other newer well-being choices you've made?
Nothing beyond that. The quality quiet time, the disconnecting on my day off with a clear conscience, and the physical fitness, I think have been all key elements.
Okay.
I guess I would say too, I was always the type to, I want to do more and I want to do it fast. I want to see everything get accomplished and I want to see us do move into every ministry opportunity that we can. But I'm realizing now that I can't do everything. And as I get older, I slow down a little bit. And so even in the setting I'm in now, I still have a heart to see young adults reached in our community. And so I did start a young adult small group, and that's somewhat beyond it's not in my job description, so to speak, but it's on my heart. But I don't want to get stuck to where we grow something like where it needs a weekly large group meeting and I have to plan a talk every week and that kind of stuff. It would be how do we get the young adults to create a movement where I'm not the young adults pastor, so to speak,
Mm,
because I have a full plate as the adult discipleship pastor. So I'm more guarded now to say, you know what, I can't take that on. I can't take any more on, and it's okay if I say no.
mm. That's huge. Okay to say no.
Yeah,
I think when it comes to ministry, many pastors feel like saying no is just like saying no to God,
right.
even though it might be something that is more than what they really can take and more than, too much to have on one person's plate.
Yeah, right.
How did you deal then with the expectations of people? It sounded like your church planter group got it. They
Yeah.
understood.
Mhm.
But did you ever have to deal with other people's expectations of you, either then when you were, in the throes of burnout or now?
I'd say maybe in the church planning circle I was in and the network that we were in, there were competing views. Fortunately, the pastor of my sponsoring church and I and our direct report, so to speak, in our association of churches, we were on the same page. But the leadership that came from our state denomination were not on the same page as us. And so there was a little bit of tension there. And so that was a little bit hard to navigate. So then you felt like, well, I'm not performing to expectations on one side, but I think I am on the other side. And then of course in time we had people leave, they wanted to see certain things take place in our little ministry, but it wasn't
Mhm.
happening. And so they went somewhere where it was. So then you feel frustrated and defeated, thinking, well, why wouldn't I thought you were committed to help us grow this here? Why don't you help make it happen here? But instead they just checked out to go somewhere else. And so had to let them go, but you get discouraged. So there's that discouragement as well.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. The fish are always jumping from tank to tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
I think it's kind of a whole nother conversation for another arena, but in the
yeah.
world of church planting, I think that when church planters burn out or struggle and the thing doesn't go, there's a lot of grief in that feeling
Hmm.
like you went down a dead end or you failed in ministry.
Hmm.
So even though everyone thought what we did was for that season and God was in it, it was fruitful, it was great. We ended on a positive note, but me as the senior leader can't help but feel like I failed. And so there's no, at least in the circle I was in, there was no after, debrief or triage support for a church planter in that case. And I wonder if anyone's dealing with that anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was, I think, somewhat the beginning for me of a compassion for ministry leaders when I saw church planters, and at the time, parachute drops were the thing. This
Yeah.
is a number of years ago, even though we know today that their chance of survival is pretty small, really, compared to some other models. But yeah, I saw church planters fail, and it was almost like they threw them out in the water from the pier and said, "Hey, can you swim?" after
Yeah.
they threw them out. And
Right.
then when they couldn't swim, it was like, who's hauling them out and helping them walk through the failure, the sense of failure that they feel. And of course, God doesn't waste anything. And you learn, you say, what did we learn from that? Okay, it didn't work out how we expected. What can we learn? And but I felt like they were too easily discarded, and then they move on to the next thing. And then when one takes, there's a whole lot of backslapping that goes on. Hey, 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 this is
Yeah.
amazing.
And then
So
there's that comparison trap again.
I know, and I guess that's a rather crass renditioning of what has happened, but I'm just, I'm saying what I perceived and how I felt, just a great sense of sadness on their behalf. So hopefully somebody has taken that mantle up. So if you were to talk to your younger self prior to burnout, what are the top couple of things that you would say, not only to yourself, but then also, as a way of offering that to our friends who are listening?
Yeah. I think I would certainly say slow down and cultivate a quality, quiet time with God. And then the other thing, and I've reflected on this before, is as a young adult, I was busy too. I was growing this booming college ministry. And as a young professional, I often would forfeit time to hang out with our young professionals group that I was a part of. And I look back now and I regret not, of course, with social media, we stay somewhat connected, but I
Mm.
realized I missed out on developing some key relationships and being present with some people that were really meaningful in my life. And so I think the other part is being present with people.
Yes, yes. Do not do this journey alone. And that goes for any of us, whether you're a layperson, whether you're a ministry leader, whether it's friends, accountability group, a coach, a mentor, something. Just don't be doing this alone. It's just, I think we're meant to acknowledge the gifts that other people are to us
Mhm.
in our lives. So, well, thank you so much for what you brought here today to the conversation about burnout. And I would like to ask you, from, since we're going to be on the Crabby Pastor podcast here, what makes you crabby?
Okay. Yeah. Certainly I like to protect my time or what I want to do. So even though I always point out all of Jesus's ministry was out of an interruption, and we need to allow interruptions and margin in our lives for ministry, I certainly still get crabby when I feel like people have imposed on my time and
Mm.
interrupted me.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for offering that. And I'd like to ask that question because it's kind of a, I don't know, reality check that ministry leaders get crabby too.
Right.
you know, because we are people,
Yeah.
right? Right. Well, thank you so much for being on the Crabby Pastor podcast and sharing your burnout story in the spirit of, may it be helpful for someone else and may God redeem this too.
Thank you.
So, how do the pieces of your life fit together? Do they fit together well and things are humming along just fine? Or are there some pieces that are tight or absent or just not fitting the bill? This is your invitation to join me in my glass workshop for a video series where I am going to do a stained glass project while I talk to you about sustainability and building sustainability into your heart and into your life. So I am going to be doing my art, which is a form of self-care, and I'm going to invite you into that space with me, and I'm going to chat. I'm going to chat about self-care, and I'm going to show you how I create And there's a nifty analogy. Stained glass seems to be a very good metaphor for what I want to talk about. So I'd love for you to join me. To do that, to opt in, I'll need you to email me at crabbypastor@gmail.com. That's crabbypastor@gmail.com. So you won't want to miss this. You definitely won't want to miss this. So make a plan to join me in the glass workshop. Are you wondering whether your fatigue, your lack of motivation, your lack of interest is burnout, maybe? I just wanted to let you know that I have a resource on the website, margiebryce.com. That's BRYCE, margiebryce.com. And it is a burnout questionnaire free for you to download and kind of self-assess and get a sense of where you're at. And they're questions that not only ask about what you're going through, but maybe how often you're experiencing it. And that's kind of a key to where you might be, because you have to know where you are in order to chart a course forward. And most pastors and ministry leaders who experience burnout rarely know that that's where they're at until they're well into it. And if you're unsure about that little statistic, so far everybody that I've interviewed on this podcast who has experienced burnout, when I ask that kind of question, they're like, yeah, I didn't know that's where I was at. So again, go to margiebryce.com. It's on the homepage of the website, and you can get your burnout questionnaire and kind of see where you're at. Hey friends, the Crabby Pastor podcast is sponsored by Bryce Art Glass, and you can find that on Facebook. I make stained glass. That's part of my self-care. And also by Bryce Coaching, where I coach ministry leaders and business leaders. And so the funds that I generate from coaching and from making stained glass is what is supporting this podcast. And I will have opportunities for you to be a part of sponsoring me. And as always, you can do the buy me a cup of coffee thing in the show notes. But I will have some other ways that you can be a part of getting the word out about the importance of healthy self-care for ministry leaders. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry, and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.